Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about when to start the 2L job hunt. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Alison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about when to start the 2L job hunt. Welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. Well, we're recording this in early February. It's probably coming out a few weeks later. If I'm a 2L who doesn't have a summer job, how concerned should I be?
I think you should be a little bit concerned, to be totally honest. It's late. So nothing's ever, over until we get to the summer. So there's still time to find a job, but this is when you should really be like kicking it into gear and be looking for your backup plan job. The thing that you were like, I might not want to do this, but I have an option of working for someone I know or potentially working for a professor, because you are sort of past the general window of 2L jobs. So this is where you need to find a job for the summer, whatever it is, legal related.
I think that's right. You definitely want to be maybe taking that option B or C that you wouldn't have taken, in December or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, this is where you need to find something, you need to get it set. And I still think there's a job for everyone, but this isn't a time where you can kind of see what, comes around. This is where you need something.
Right.
You need something
picky.
Settled. Yeah, there's no more picky.
All right. Well, what if I'm a 1L and I'm listening to this and I'm freaking out because I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe that'll be me next year. I mean, should I already be looking for a 2L job?
I think it's way too early for a 1L to be thinking about a 2L job when we're talking about it's still the winter. So, most 1Ls don't even have their 1L jobs yet. I would say it's probably like 50-50 at this point. Once we get out of January, all the like early people who were thinking about this in the fall probably did get their 1L jobs, but everyone else is kind of in the thick of it. So I would say, if you don't have a 1L job, that's where your focus should be. I wouldn't spend too much energy late winter thinking about your 2L job yet. If you're a 1L, it's just not where I would put my focus.
Right. I think that's right. I mean, if you're a 1L, you need to be thinking about your first year summer job if you haven't secured that yet. That's step one. And also, at this point, I mean, grades are really the most important thing, right?
I always tell my students that. I think that second semester 1L year is probably your most important time for grades. And I'm not trying to put extra pressure on people, just kind of letting students know that, this is important. If you, only have a set amount of time, which you do, that's where I would be putting my energy into doing the best you can grades wise, because that's going to lead to the job. And even if you didn't do well first semester, this is a chance to improve. And I would say that most students really do improve second semester. I usually see somewhat of upward trajectory, second semester. So I just wouldn't want you to split your focus too much on jobs when the grades really are the most important thing going into the job.
Right. I mean, I think that upward trend, if you didn't perform as well as you'd hoped first semester, is really what is going to, be your storyline when you're in these interviews of, first semester was an adjustment, but as you can see, I really, really applied myself and I did better second semester. That's ideally the story you want to be telling, not, I bombed my entire first year. Please give me a job.
It's a much harder story. And that's where you have to say, okay, what are my options? What can fit? Because you can't just, make something up grades wise. They are what they are. They're in black and white. And so you just definitely don't want to see a downward trajectory second semester, because the story usually is, oh, I had trouble adjusting, law school's so different, and I got academic help, whatever it is. So it's just a much harder story to tell if there was no improvement, or worst case, your grades went down.
Yeah, so I think that's your first priority. You'll find a 2L job later. So what's the typical time frame when students really should be thinking about some different types of jobs? Let's start with BigLaw.
So I would say BigLaw has the tightest sort of time frame because it's sort of a set process. And it happens over a really short period of time, and it's gotten shorter and shorter in the years that I've been doing this. So generally, you're going to do your bidding like in June. And that, there's a range depending on the school, and you're going to have your OCI interviews probably the end of July at the earliest, more like throughout August. And then callbacks are going to be as soon as you can schedule them. So generally the whole thing in terms of OCI is over by the end of September. It might go into October for some schools, or for some employers that, did a slower process. But generally, BigLaw is like a tight time frame, so you want to be ready to go and know, that everything is sort of figured out before you get into that time frame. Because once you're there, it's going to be hard to, make a lot of changes or spend too much time researching things. You want to have that all set going into it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's definitely gotten more and more and more compressed, and also moved further forward. So it's just something to be aware of. Even if you are a 1L listening to this, you might just want to check, if OCI is something you're going to do and something that's, hopefully going to result in a possible job for you. What are the deadlines? Like, how does this process work? You don't need to worry about it at this point, but you do just kind of want to be aware of like, am I scheduling travel right in the middle of when I'm supposed to be doing interviews? That kind of thing you probably don't want to do.
And I would say, you could just put the dates into your calendar.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
I always think that's a good idea. The dates are definitely already on there at this point. And if they're not, they will be soon. So I would just put it in your calendar, because the thing you want to do is get all of this stuff done as quickly as possible. I've heard students say, oh, they asked me for a callback, but I had a trip planned. Now, I understand if it's like a family wedding, right. But generally maybe don't plan just like fun travel around that time or other things. You want to get in as soon as possible, because they're going to see other people and make offers to them. So even though you have the same shot, like spaces can be limited. So you want to do everything as soon as possible. Do not be lax about that.
No, definitely. I agree. Like if somebody asks you for a callback, you want to be on their schedule as soon as possible. And yeah, saying, oh, well, I had this pre-existing plan to go scuba diving in Tahiti is probably not going to make the best impression.
Yeah. So now it's like, you have 6 months to sort of plan out when, you could do some fun things so you make yourself available during that time period. And the other thing is, you don't want to be like, oh, well, they weren't my top choice, so I was waiting to hear from somebody else. You should get all of the interviews that you possibly can in as soon as possible. So that's something you can think about now.
I agree. You can always turn people down, but you don't want to be hanging out just waiting around to see if your very first choice gets back to you, because if they don't, then you don't have options, and you want to have options in this process, ideally.
Yeah. Until you have a job, it's not over.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, let's shift gears. How about other things like, for example, public interest?
So public interest, it's not the same kind of process where everyone does the same thing. At least that's what I've seen. So public interest a lot of times does participate in OCI, so that will be the same. Like the dates will be the same.
Yeah, or I know some schools, they do like a later one where it's like the public interest, like it's not OCI, but similar type of thing.
Yeah, it's more like a job fair, or there might be job fairs, in your city for public interest. So you can look into all of that earlier rather than later, so again, what the dates are. But it's not going to be a set, there may be things that are later from what I've seen, or, there could be things that are earlier. Just know, which public interest jobs you're interested in, or if you're just interested in any of them, spread yourself out and see what all the dates are, but get those in, because they still do have a process. It's just not as regulated, I would say.
Right. I think one thing to keep in mind here is you don't want to forget about funding, because depending on your school, you may have to apply for funding if you're doing public interest. And that might be something you apply for pretty early in the year, or sometimes even over the summer. So you just, again, like, you don't need to panic about this, but you just want to be aware, like, talk to the people who organize this at your school, find out from them, what are the deadlines I need to meet in order to get this funding, because you want to make sure you're getting paid if possible.
And if you're not sure what kind of job you can get, it seems like there's no harm in applying for these things, because it'd be a lot worse to not have any, funding for something than, to maybe say, oh, okay, like, I got a private job and I won't need this. So
yeah, I'll turn it down.
Yeah. Make sure that you have gotten in, whatever you need to get in by the dates you need to get in. And that may be a conversation to have with career services.
Right.
But I totally agree. You should have all of that in, because there's a lot of students who are sort of begging afterwards. They missed a deadline, and a lot of these things can't be changed. Like, they can't, the money's been allocated.
Right. And if you miss the deadline, well, too bad for you. Somebody else didn't, and they get the cash.
Yeah, exactly. And you're unpaid.
Right. Exactly. And then how about sort of like other employers, things like government, small firms? I mean, people are not typically doing externships with judges at this point, but, maybe something like that. When should people be thinking about this stuff?
So I would say that, that's more like on a rolling basis. So what I would do is, probably late spring, do your research, make a list, go to the websites, because these are probably going to be more like direct apply. And I think there's no harm in just applying as soon as you have your documents and you're ready to go. That being said, they're not going to have probably a set summer class in the way that like BigLaw or even, like the DA's office would or something like that. But I still think it's a situation where even if they don't give you a deadline, you still want to be in early, because they may hire all the people they want to hire. So this is something you can look at later as your plan B and C if you need to. And so you could potentially apply later. But if this is what you want to do, then I would say get these done early also.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I mean, I think the advice overall is just make sure you know what your deadlines are and work towards those, but there's no need to panic at this point, really, if you're a 1L.
Yeah, just think about what your plan's going to be.
Right, exactly. Make sure you're not like blowing deadlines, because you just haven't thought about this until like February.
Exactly.
All right, well, if somebody wants to sort of get a jump on some of this stuff, what do you suggest they do either, in the spring semester if they have some time, or like early summer might be more realistic for people?
Well, I think the thing you should kind of always have is an updated resume, or like other documents, an updated LinkedIn. So that's something you should be doing as time goes by, because you probably have your 1L resume, but you're going to update it with things that happened, during second semester. So that's something that you can have going. And that being said, you're going to keep updating it as sort of things change. And that also includes a cover letter. That's something I think you could work on in the spring, like a general cover letter. And then maybe you're applying to a couple different sort of buckets of jobs. So if you're doing BigLaw, but maybe you're also looking at some smaller firms or something, maybe you have 2 different drafts of your cover letter. But I get a lot of students who come and they're like, I've never done a cover letter before. I don't even know where to start. And that's something I would say you definitely can be working on ahead of time. And there's lots of resources for that. I really like Harvard and Yale both have links, if you just Google it, to cover letter and resume templates that I think are really good to get started. Obviously, lots of people have templates, and there's a template, probably in your Word documents and things like that. But those are all things that I think you can be doing over time. And that's like definitely the place to start, is with your documents.
Right. And anything, like you said, that's happened either in this first semester or later in, at the end of second semester, like if you tallied a class, that should be on there. If you are involved in a certain pro bono organization, if you join a journal, all of these things, this is what employers are looking for. So, I think it can be easy to sort of forget that you need to put this stuff on there, but you definitely do.
And let's say that you already know what your 1L job's going to be. You can start thinking about that. You don't need to wait till the job happens or is over. You can start thinking, okay, as you go, like, what are my tasks there? What am I going to use as bullet points? What do I think are the most important things to get out of it? That's great going into it,
Yeah, and also think about what to take off your resume too, because at some point, jobs, if you're a barista in high school, probably doesn't need to be on your resume when you're applying to a law firm, that kind of thing. Like, it's easy, I think, with a resume, if you have one that you've just been updating over time, that it gets a bit calcified and you're not really looking at it with that fresh eye saying, okay, what's most relevant to this job? Am I just listing out, that I was a lifeguard, or is there something that I could put on here that's going to be more impactful?
Totally. And I think students get weirdly attached to certain things on their resume,
Totally.
And it's like they take it very personally when I take it off. And it's like, I had to make some tough decisions here.
Right.
It had to be one page. It had to make sense. There's more relevant things. So it doesn't mean that experience from high school didn't mean anything. It just means that it's not as relevant now to what you're doing. And you should think about who the employer is. So you can even have different resumes. People are really big on, let's say, like a lot of community service. And I'm not saying that you can't put some community service, but if you're applying to BigLaw, putting like an entire section of your community service, it might not convey the thing you want it to convey. Like sometimes it does say, oh, are you more interested in, public interest jobs or something like that. So think about things like that when you're working on your resume.
Definitely. And vice versa. If you're applying for a public interest position and most of your experience has been in, say, the corporate sector previously, you kind of have to tone that down a little bit and maybe bump up the things that you were doing outside of work and volunteering and that kind of thing, because they're thinking in the opposite direction of like, oh, does this person really just want to go into like a corporate firm, but they're applying here as a backup? Nobody likes to feel like they're your second choice.
Totally. And I think that, that's where it's good to have a second eye, because your resume, you've seen it a lot, you've updated it, it looks a certain way to you, it tells a certain story to you, it may look totally different to a fresh eye. And I think that's always helpful. Don't be defensive, hear what they have to say.
Right. I think sometimes people think it has to be this very objective document and they're somehow lying if they take something off of it, or they change something so it sounds different. But this is a persuasive document. This is not an objective memo, basically. And
a lie, it is a lie. Like if there's something on your resume that did not happen, that is a lie.
Right. You can't lie. You should not lie on your resume.
And I'm very careful about that. But I actually think the line is super clear. You can phrase something a certain way to focus on certain skills you used. You don't necessarily have to say how many hours you did the job. But as long as you did it, it's the truth. You're, like you said, you're telling a story with your resume.
Right. And you need to have actually done the job. You can't just make things up and put them on there.
Exactly. That's a lie. Or saying you got a grade you didn't get, or, that you ranked in a way you didn't. Like those are all lies. But, phrasing something in a certain way, to focus on, certain skills, that's not a lie.
Right. And also be aware that your school may have things you can or can't put on your resume. Like we weren't technically allowed to calculate a GPA. We weren't allowed to put a GPA on a resume. So you want to make sure you understand those rules too, because those are the kind of things employers typically know about. And they're just going to be like, well, that's weird if you're the only person from your school that puts like your GPA or class rank on a school that never does that.
Totally. Also, I often take people's GPAs or ranks off when they're not high. And I think sometimes students view that as lying, like they just want to put it out there. You don't need to advertise it on your resume. They're going to see it.
If they want a transcript, they can ask for a transcript.
Yeah, exactly. So I just feel like, and there's that's like an art of what's the point where you put it on or don't put it on. And that's like a conversation to have with somebody. But, if it's, not very high, I just feel like it doesn't need to stand out as the first thing, because your law school is going to be the first thing on your resume.
Right. And then sometimes you see people trying to be like almost, top
Yeah,
15%
I hate
or something. And you're just like, no, you're not top 15%. Don't put that on there.
Exactly. We're like just out of range. What does that mean?
Almost got
on the cusp.
Yeah. It's like, no, you either are or you're not. Like
Just
this is an
never.
objective number.
Yeah. And focus on other good things. You
Right,
know what I
exactly.
mean? So your GPA may not be the thing that's like the best thing on there, but maybe you have good work experience or other things.
Yeah, like everybody's got something. So if your GPA is not your selling point, I mean, if you do have like near perfect grades, yeah, put that at the very top. But only if your school allows you to.
And I think certain schools also have rules about how things have to look. So I do think make sure that that's all been signed off on. You didn't do anything you weren't supposed to do.
Yeah, because it's just you don't want to draw attention in that way of like, this doesn't look like everything else we always get from this school. Is something weird going on here?
Exactly.
All right, well, what else could I be thinking about doing? I'm like, all my docs are looking good. I've checked them. I've double checked them. I've had other people look at them. What else could I possibly be doing?
So I would start networking, earlier rather than later. And I think people have this view of networking as this very set thing where you are like calling somebody up and asking them for a job. And I think that's intimidating to students. And that's not what I consider networking. I think it's just building relationships. So maybe it's sort of thinking about people that you talk to during your 1L job search or people in your network, putting it on your LinkedIn that you're looking for a 2L job sometime in the spring, making sure that people know that. And just sort of, I think networking is a lot easier when it's done over a longer period of time. So when you're trying to get it all in during like the few weeks before you're going to start applying, that's stressful. And I think you can come across as desperate. But when you're doing it in a way where you're just kind of building on relationships and things like that over a period of time and following up with people and going to events and things like that are held on campus, that's what I sort of view as networking. So I would say take like an easier approach to it and start thinking about it, before you're going to apply to everything.
I agree. I think the more organic it is, the better. And it could literally be something as simple as you saw an article that you think somebody might be interested in, and you send them an email. It's like, hey, I saw this article. I was thinking of you. And like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, and by the way, I'm looking for a job.
Yeah. I think that's where students get caught up. And it's just, it shouldn't look like that. That's not what I think of as networking. And it's probably new, to most students, like, that haven't had these type of jobs before. So I totally understand. But yeah, it's just building relationships.
Yeah. And say that person's like in your city or town and they respond and be like, oh, thanks so much. That's great. Like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing really well. Do you have time for a coffee? Maybe we could catch up sometime in the next few weeks.
And you sort of let them know what's going on, and then it comes up that, oh, here's what I'm doing this summer, and wow, we already have to think about next summer,
Yeah, like, oh gosh, whoo. And then people are generally like, oh, maybe you should talk to this person I know. Like, it happens more organically, hopefully.
Yeah, so I think you could start thinking about that now. The other thing is sort of like we talked about, kind of coming up with a game plan. And again, this is something that will take time, so I don't want it to take away from your studies. So we're talking about sort of later in the spring, when you're not like deep into the semester in your work. But I would start researching where you want to apply, make a list. I like Excel. You can use lots of things, to keep track of, where you're applying. But I would have a list that says the employer, maybe their website, if they have a date you need to apply, where you need to apply, like where they're located, things you can sort, maybe who you're going to contact there if there's, some networking you're going to do. And this would include, are there job fairs in your area? There's sometimes diversity fairs. There's job fairs that are specific to like IP or certain practice groups. Look into those. Maybe you're going to fly yourself somewhere to go to a job fair because you think you could get a job out of it. That might be worth your time and money. So these are all things I would plan out because you could budget for that. What's the best use of your time? And a lot of these things can happen before OCI, so make sure you know the dates.
Yeah, and I think, if you wanted to start on some of this stuff early, one way you could do it is just block out, say, like 2 hours a week on the weekend. Every Saturday at 3 p.m., you're going to sit down, you're going to do this work so that you're not letting it bleed into the rest of your life, but you are, chunking it and doing like a solid amount of effort before the end of the semester.
And it's on your calendar with a reminder. I find those are a lot harder, to throw away. You see it, you're planning your weekend. You're like, well, I said I would do this 2 hours, and you're more likely to do it.
Oh, like so much more likely.
Yeah. So I totally agree. I always tell students to do that. And even if, you skip some of it, you'll probably follow through with some of those times. And there's always something you can do in that time period.
Right, definitely. I think this is also a good time to get help on any weaker areas that you know about. Do you need to talk to somebody about your plan? It could be career services. It could be someone else. This is a great time to get to know people in career services if you haven't done that yet. But, interview skills, like somebody to look at your documents. You want to have a team here, basically.
And let's say that that your, this part of your 1L search didn't go well. You just kind of know that the interviews did not go as well as you expected. Maybe you've done some mock interviews and you've gotten some feedback. Work on those areas. Ask yourself where you can improve without defensiveness. And I think that's where doing it earlier rather than later is better because, you may need to let go of some feelings about it.
Right. It gives you time to process.
Yeah, because if you're looking at this in July, I just find that students, they end up like making kind of this rehearsed script because they don't know what to do. And I highly recommend not doing that. You don't want to sound like in an interview, you just read out this thing because you didn't know what to do. Get yourself comfortable, with having more of a conversation in an interview. And that's all something that I think takes time.
Right. And also it'd be a good place if you're like practicing your networking. Like that's a great kind of low risk area of just like if you can find somebody to go to coffee with you and talk about things, like because some of this is just about getting comfortable talking about yourself, talking about your plans, all these kind of things, and just being in that slightly more professional environment, I think can be intimidating to people.
Absolutely. And that's where I also think you could think ahead to what are you going to wear?
Yes,
are they
definitely.
Zoom
Outfits.
Interviews? Yeah.
Get your outfits ready.
Yeah. Like think about, sales that happen like, a certain time of year, like some store always has their sales or something like that. And so if you have 6 months to think about it, that gives you more time to like find something that you're going to feel comfortable in. And, even thinking about what the environment's going to be. I think a lot of places are still doing Zoom interviews. Mm-hmm. So what is that going to look like? Just sort of thinking ahead just generally to that stuff leaves less, stress at the last minute.
Right, because you don't want to have a situation where someone's like, great, we want to do a Zoom interview tomorrow and you have nothing to wear and you don't have a place to do that and your computer broke,
Exactly. Like, where are you going to be living at that time? Think about, okay, I'm going to have to do interviews from this space or I'm going to have to find somewhere else or something like that. So,
yeah,
so think about all that.
Does your school have a place you could do it? But if not, do you have a blank wall at your house that you could sit in front of and maybe get a little plant? It'll look fine.
You have good Wi-Fi, everything. So that's all stuff I think you can sort of think about, ahead of time so that it's not, like you said, like a rush the day before.
Yeah, I remember I got a request for a 1L interview like over winter break and I didn't have a suit at that point. It was really suitable. And I remember trying to go shopping. I think I was like in Atlanta at like my grandparents' house and like, everything they had in the South was like colored. And I was like, I'm interviewing in New York City. Like I need black, It's just like.
You have to look conservative.
No, I was like, got this personal shopper who was trying to dress me in things with like feathers on them. I'm like, no, this is not really, it was very stressful. I think in the end I just went to like a Brooks Brothers or something and it was fine. But still, like it was definitely stressful that didn't need to be happening if it was like actually, a plan that I'd had.
And that is a reminder about outfits that, you don't want to stand out in the wrong way. And the legal industry is just pretty conservative and kind of old school. And so this isn't really a chance to, go too far out
express your personality
comfort zone. Yeah. You can express it a little bit,
right?
Maybe with some jewelry.
Exactly. Like a colored earring might work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so something pretty boring is probably, but it needs to be something you feel comfortable in that you can just throw on and like feel like you're ready to go. And you probably want to have a couple of different options in case you have to do like multiple interviews in a row.
And that's where you talk to career services about all this stuff too. Get their opinion, see what they think.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we're about out of time. One more question. Do you think it's worth doing OCI for BigLaw if it's kind of a long shot option for someone?
So I think if you have the time and inclination and it's something you really would want, if somehow you got it, then I kind of do think you don't have that much to lose other than the time. If your GPA is so low that there's absolutely no shot at it, then yeah, I probably wouldn't do it. But I think you'd have to think of it as sort of your backup option. And so you have your things that are more likely, in the same way when you're applying to law schools, you have your safeties and your reaches. So you just think of the, BigLaw OCI thing as a reach. But I will say I have seen people that are sort of on the cusp that I think, maybe weren't going to do it, and they do end up doing well. And sometimes those grade cutoffs are not exact. So, you can't be way outside of it, but if you're a little outside of it, I don't think that's a reason not to apply. So I think it's just a matter of where you want to put your sort of time resources. But if it's something you think you would like, I just don't see a reason not to do it.
Yeah, I think as long as you have other plans, that maybe are more feasible. And also sometimes people don't realize that they may have personal characteristics that maybe overcome a slightly lower GPA. Like they had, they worked in as an engineer before law school and they want to do patent litigation. It's like, okay, they're going to give you, if you have a master's degree in like electrical engineering, that's a different person walking in than somebody who just got out of college.
Or you are somebody who is going to do really well in interviews. I do meet those people and I'm like, I think you have to give it a chance because they're really going to like you. And so they might be able to sell you.
Yeah, if you can get in the door, like someone's maybe going to go to bat for you if you just know that you're really great at interviewing, which some people are. Just like some people are great at standardized testing, Yeah.
Or you need to have heard that feedback from somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Right. Not just like, oh, you're so nice, I'm sure you'll get a job.
Yeah. You need to hear that from like a professional who's like, wow, you're really good at this.
Yeah. Like if you can get in the door, like you've got a real shot here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or just like other, characteristics that they may be looking for in terms of diversity. Like there are lots of different ways that the numbers may not be exact. But like you said, I mean, if your GPA is like an entire point off, it's probably pointless.
Yeah. But I think that some people do take themselves out of the game because, it said the GPA cutoff was a 3.5 and I'm a 3.3. And my reaction is like, that's
close enough
to not apply. So don't take yourself out of the game for no reason,
Yeah, I would say that also that's close enough. You should at least give that a shot.
Exactly.
Because I mean, frankly, like I've worked at a lot of firms, like they just sort of made up these things anyway. They weren't set in stone. I mean,
well, usually you're actually forced as a firm to put a GPA range like through the OCI system. And there aren't a lot of places that write out what their GPA cutoff is or even have that like, in a book or rules or anything like that. It's just kind of like, it feels like this is where most people fall.
I worked at one firm where their GPA cutoff was like laughably high. Like literally nobody in the school would have had this GPA, and they hired like a lot of people from the school.
I think I can guess the place.
Yeah, exactly. So like no one took this very seriously.
Yeah. And, there are places that really, won't overlook grades for anything. Right.
I mean, if it's Wachtell, they probably want to have like the actual like high GPA they're asking for.
Right. And like the person could have loved you, but there's nothing that the interviewer can say to the hiring person, that'll get you through. And there are just places like that. But I would say that isn't most places.
Yeah, it's really not. So, I mean, take them somewhat seriously, but don't like take yourself out of the running because you're not quite in the bucket. But again, like if you're like a 2.2, then like, yeah, they're not hiring you. Sorry.
Well, and you need to think about that. I will say that I hear from some students who come and are, I want BigLaw. I'm going to get into BigLaw. And then you look at their transcript and you have to say to them, look, that is unlikely. And you have to be open to hearing that. Like there's nothing that anyone can coach you, or change if your GPA is a 2.0. You know, maybe you wanted BigLaw, but it's not going to happen during the summer. So I will say be realistic. If it's just a backup option, it's like, okay, you want BigLaw, that's unlikely. So let's look at smaller firms, or let's look at some alternative.
Yeah, I think you want to be realistic, but not overly pessimistic. All right. Well, any final thoughts on this?
So my final thought is sort of, it's a balancing act between, like I said, your focus should be on your grades and doing well second semester. That comes first. And then second is getting started on all of these things because, it does matter. And if you give yourself more time to work on it, it's going to be less stressful and sort of a more pleasant process. But if your grades, you're struggling, that always comes first, and this may need to wait. So This is all like optional if you're able to fit it in.
No, I think that's good advice. And if you are struggling, you need to figure out what you can do to turn your semester around, whether it's talking to academic services, working with a tutor, getting a study group. If you know things are not going well, this is time to really put all of your attention on trying to improve your grades because ultimately that's going to have a huge impact on your job search.
And that's why I wanted to be very clear, and it may scare some people that second semester grades are really the most important. So you need to do whatever you need to do to just show that there was improvement. I'm not saying you need to, get all A's, but showing that improvement makes all the difference in your story.
Absolutely. It's a much easier story to tell than, I didn't do anything differently and I got the same grades I got the first semester, which I was disappointed in.
There's nothing I can really do with that story.
No, there's really not. It's not a great story. All right. Well, with that, unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, you can check out careerdicta.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.